Before I begin, if you've been with List 25 for a while, you know our classic style inside and out. But as creators, we always want to make sure we're giving you the best, highest quality experience possible. So today, we're trying something. Now, we aren't overhauling the whole channel. This is just a test flight. Watch the whole video, see how it feels, and do me a huge favor. Leave a comment down below letting us know. You guys run the ship here, so we want your honest feedback. With that out of the way, let's check out some weird towns. Every town has a story. Most of them are pretty ordinary. Founding fathers, local high school football championship, maybe a regional pie festival. Beneath the surface of some postcard perfect communities, there's something else going on entirely. We like to think we know the places we live. Some towns are built on secrets so deeply woven into the landscape that the residents have just learned to accept them as part of daily life. Imagine a town in Alaska where almost every single resident lives inside the exact same building. Or a borough in Pennsylvania that's been actively on fire underground for over 60 years. How about a gated community in New York where you literally cannot buy a house unless you're a registered medium who claims to talk to the dead? These aren't movie sets, and they aren't urban legends. People wake up, pour coffee, and go to work in these places every day. Today, we're peeling back the topsoil on the side of America you won't find in any tourism brochure. I'm Mike Estrin, and these are 25 American towns with a dark or bizarre secret. We kick things off in the freezing north. If you travel to Whittier, Alaska, you'll find a community that completely redefined the concept of a close-knit neighborhood. Think about a standard town spread across a valley. Now, compress all of it, the housing, the city hall, the grocery store, the post office, and the school into a single 14-story former Cold War Army barracks called Picher Towers. Virtually the entire population of about 270 people lives under one roof, navigating their daily lives via underground tunnels so they never have to step into the brutal Alaskan elements. The escape route is equally tight. The only land connection to the outside world is a single-lane, 2.5-mile tunnel through a mountain that alternates direction every 30 minutes and locks down completely at night. When that gate shuts, you are trapped inside a mountain fortress with your entire town. Sort of like Luke Skywalker at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. Dropping down from the Arctic to the desert, you'll encounter a completely different kind of isolation in Hillsboro, New Mexico. If you're driving down a remote mountain highway with zero cell service and a dying fuel gauge, rolling into what looks like a ghost town can feel pretty eerie. The only sign of life is a lone police cruiser parked in the center of town, a uniformed officer sitting silently behind the wheel. You slow down, bracing for a ticket. But look a little closer. That officer isn't going to write you a ticket because he's made of plastic. The sheriff's department placed a permanent mannequin, affectionately named Officer Copper by the locals, in the driver's seat as a dirt cheap speed deterrent. A mannequin in a cop car is funny. It's a quirky piece of southwestern Americana. The next few towns on our list remind us that isolation isn't always about geographic distance or eccentric traffic solutions. Sometimes, isolation is weaponized by the community itself to keep certain people out. This exact dynamic defines the heavily documented, deeply unsettling history of Vidor, Texas. For most of the 20th century, Vidor carried a reputation as a notorious sundown town, a place where black travelers were warned by roadside signs to leave before darkness fell. This wasn't an informal rumor. It was a reality enforced through explicit community intimidation and KKK violence. Even when a federal court forced the desegregation of Vidor's public housing in 1993, it sparked furious Klan marches that made national headlines. Today, a younger generation is actively fighting to change the narrative. even organizing a historic Black Lives Matter march in 2020. With a demographic that remains over 90% white, the shadow of that recent past is exceptionally long. A remarkably similar struggle with a persistent legacy is played out in Howell, Michigan. Howell has been trying to run away from a reputation it can't seem to shake. In the late 20th century, a prominent KKK Grand Dragon named Robert Miles held cross burnings and white nationalist rallies right on his farm just outside town. City leaders have spent years launching public relations campaigns to distance Howell from that hatred. History has a way of scratching at the door. In July 2024, a group of white supremacists marched right through downtown Howell carrying Nazi flags and chanting racist slogans. Local officials denounced them instantly, stating that marchers were outsiders who didn't represent the town. While that's highly likely true for the average resident, the fact that the town continually has to issue these statements shows how easily an ugly history can anchor itself to a zip code. Sometimes a town's secret isn't a shadow from the past, but an active, alternative reality operating right behind a closed gate, which is exactly what happened in Yelm, Washington. Since 1987, this rural town has hosted the Ramtha School of Enlightenment. The school is built entirely around a woman named Jay-Z Knight, who claims to channel a 35,000-year-old warrior from the lost continent of Lemuria. The operation is headquartered on a heavily fenced 80-acre compound. When an organization like this takes root, it doesn't just stay behind the fence. It alters the local economy. For decades, thousands of international students have flooded into Yelm, buying property, opening businesses, and weaving New Age belief systems directly into the town's financial fabric. While supporters view it as a beautiful spiritual sanctuary, former members and critics have leveled accusations of psychological control and financial exploitation. It's a stark reminder of what happens when a small town's survival becomes intertwined with a single, highly controversial ideology. But if you prefer your conformity with a bit more historical charm, you'll find it in Orange City, Iowa. Founded by Dutch immigrants in 1870, Orange City looks like a European postcard. Local laws literally require downtown commercial buildings to sport traditional Dutch-style facades, and the annual Tulip Festival is a massive public celebration. Underneath the windmill and tulip aesthetic lies an intense social expectation. The town's social, political, and commercial life is tightly anchored around a deeply conservative Reformed church community. According to local accounts, if you move into Orange City without that specific religious affiliation, breaking into social circles or growing a local business can feel nearly impossible. The unwritten rules of fitting in are strictly enforced, even if they aren't printed on any of the Dutch storefronts. Our next stop shows that a warm public face can hide an incredibly dark back room, a reality hikers often encounter in Rutland, Vermont. If you've hiked the Appalachian Trail, you probably know about the Yellow Deli in Rutland. It's famous for great food, a beautifully rustic aesthetic, and an incredibly warm, welcoming staff. The deli is run by the 12 Tribes, a fundamentalist religious community founded in 1972. The Southern Poverty Law Center classifies the 12 Tribes as an authoritarian cult. Behind the smell of fresh bread at the deli is a highly controlled communal pipeline, where members surrender all personal property, live under strict biblical patriarchy, and sever ties with the outside world. The group has faced persistent multi-state allegations of systemic child labor, severe corporal punishments, and medical neglect. The cozy deli on the trail is the ultimate marketing front for an organization with a deeply troubling underbelly. Further west, we find a community where the beauty of the architecture masks a brutal economic reality, which is the defining characteristic of Eureka, California. Eureka boasts one of the most jaw-dropping collections of preserved Victorian architecture in the country. The iconic Carson Mansion looks like a massive, ornate fever dream of 19th century wealth. The whole town feels like a living museum. Step away from the historical plaques, and the picture fractures. The collapse of the local lumber and fishing industries left economic scars that never healed. Eureka has struggled with disproportionately high property crime rates and a massive highly visible homeless population. Travelers often describe a surreal, almost unsettling contrast. It's like walking through an exquisitely beautiful, expensive picture frame, only to find the painting inside is torn to shreds. Speaking of architectural monuments to broken dreams, look at the landscape of Fort Mill, South Carolina. Back in the 80s, a 2,300-acre Christian resort and theme park called Heritage USA sat right here, drawing 6 million visitors a year as the third largest theme park in America. It was the empire of televangelist Jim Bakker. The whole thing imploded in 1989 following his massive fraud conviction and a highly publicized sexual misconduct scandal. What's left is a haunting 21-story skeleton of a hotel tower called the Heritage Grand. Funded by fraudulent timeshare sales to everyday believers, the massive steel frame has spent decades rusting away on the skyline, visible for miles. It's a bizarre daily monument for local residents, a giant decaying reminder of religious fraud towering over their backyards. If you want a community where the supernatural is the actual municipal business, you have to look at the gated community of Lilydale, New York. Lilydale is a place where you cannot buy a house unless you're a member of the Lilydale Assembly, and you can't be a member unless you're a practicing spiritualist. Over 50 of the year-round residents are registered, tested mediums who run active businesses right out of their Victorian living rooms. Every summer, tens of thousands of tourists pay an admission fee just to pass the gates, attend message services at the outdoor forest temple, and pay for private readings to speak with dead relatives. Operating continuously for over 140 years, it has its own healing temple, its own rules, and a completely unique view on where the boundary between life and death actually sits. Now we move into the spaces where the secrets are matters of national security, or closely guarded by a private code of silence. This secrecy is woven into the very origin of Los Alamos, New Mexico. Los Alamos was quite literally wiped off the map in 1943 so the US military could secretly develop the atomic bomb. The end of World War II didn't mean the secrecy stopped. Today, the Los Alamos National Library spans over 36 square miles of heavily secured, fenced-off desert mesas where nuclear weapons research is still very much alive. When you walk down Main Street, you're looking at a classic town with a farmer's market and hiking trails. But look up, and the airspace is a permanent national security no-fly zone. Fly a drone too close to the perimeter, or take a photo of the wrong fence line, and you're staring down federal criminal charges. It's a quiet suburban community wrapped tightly around a nuclear core. If Los Alamos was a military secret, the neighboring town of Colorado City, Arizona, was a theological one. For decades, this isolated border town was the absolute stronghold of Warren Jeffs and the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This wasn't mainstream Mormonism. It was an isolated, polygamist theocracy. The church owned every square inch of land. Jeffs ruled with absolute authority, assigning teenage girls into forced marriages, orchestrating living arrangements, and expelling young men, known as lost boys, who threatened his power structure. Warren Jeffs is currently serving a life sentence for the assault of minors, and federal interventions eventually broke the church's monopoly on the land. But a town doesn't just heal when the dictator goes to prison. Today, Colorado City is stuck in a deeply complicated cultural limbo. You have emancipated residents trying to build a modern, democratic town alongside deeply devout believers who still view Jeffs as a prophet, all living among the massive, half-built houses designed for polygamous families. The architecture of a cult doesn't vanish overnight. Sometimes the secret is simply how completely empty a place can be, a reality that defines the Nevada stretch of US Route 50. In 1986, Life magazine printed an article warning drivers never to take this road unless they had serious survival skills, officially dubbing it the loneliest road in America. I'm talking about nearly 300 miles of mountain passes, zero cell service, and vast desolate valley floors where a drop of the fuel gauge triggers genuine panic. Instead of fighting the bad press, Nevada's tourism board did something brilliant. They leaned entirely into the isolation, creating a Highway 50 survival guide passport where drivers can collect stamps at tiny outposts along the way to earn a certificate of completion. They managed to turn profound, intimidating loneliness into a badge of honor. I wonder if they have any hats or shirts that say, "I survived Route 50." Our next stop takes us to a dark history buried beneath millions of gallons of water, directly hitting the recreation destination of Lake Lanier, Georgia. Lake Lanier is a massive, incredibly popular summer destination, but it's also famously deadly, seeing a disproportionately high number of drownings compared to other reservoirs. In the 1950s, the Army Corps of Engineers created the reservoir by intentionally flooding an area that held the remains of Oscarville, a prosperous, self-sustaining black community that had been violently run out of the county by white mobs in 1912. The land was confiscated, the history was submerged, and today the bottom of the lake is a dark, watery maze of intact building foundations, submerged roads, and forgotten cemeteries. Those underwater ruins create lethal traps for swimmers, fueling decades of local ghost stories about an ancient, vengeful curse. You don't have to look underwater to see a town's prejudice. Sometimes it's displayed on a giant sign on the highway, which is the reality when driving into Harrison, Arkansas. If you drive into Harrison on Highway 65, you are immediately greeted by a prominent billboard advertising white pride radio and alt-right TV. It's stood there since 2013, erected by the Night Party, a KKK faction based just outside the city. Over 8,000 people have signed petitions to tear it down, and the town's leadership has repeatedly condemned it. Yet, the sign remains. It sits on a tiny, precise sliver of private land owned by a Klan-affiliated law firm, placing it entirely outside the legal jurisdiction of local zoning laws. The vast majority of Harrison's residents hate the sign, but due to a loophole in private property rights, a hate group has successfully turned the town's entrance into a permanent psychological barrier. This section explores what happens when a town's secret is so volatile that the physical environment itself has to be dismantled, burned, or quarantined, starting with the quiet community of Hayden Lake, Idaho. For nearly 30 years, a 20-acre compound hidden in the woods of Hayden Lake was the notorious nerve center of the Aryan Nations. It featured guard towers, a private chapel, and hosted massive white supremacist rallies that drew neo-Nazis from across the globe. It ended through a lawsuit. In 2000, the Southern Poverty Law Center represented 2 local residents who had been terrorized and assaulted by the compound's armed security guards. The jury hit the Aryan Nation with a crushing $6.3 million verdict, bankrupted the organization, and forced them to forfeit the property. I love the absolute poetic justice of how this story finishes. In 2001, local fire departments took over the abandoned neo-Nazi compound to use it for arson investigation training. They systematically burned every single building to the ground. Today, a philanthropist owns the land, and it's a peaceful public park. The hatred was literally incinerated out of the landscape. Toxic legacies can't always be burned away. A lesson learned the hard way by the residents of Salton City, California. The Salton Sea was created completely by accident in 1905 when an irrigation canal broke, flooding a desert basin for 2 straight years. By the 60s, developers built Salton City into a glamorous resort town packed with celebrity yachts and luxury hotels. The water eventually went bad. Because the lake has no natural outlet, decades of agricultural chemical runoff created massive, suffocating algal blooms that choked out the oxygen. The resulting fish die-offs were apocalyptic. One single day in 1999 saw 8 million dead fish surface all at once. Today, Salton City is an eerie post-apocalyptic wasteland. The shoreline smells heavily of rotting eggs, the white sand beaches are actually millions of pulverized fish bones, and toxic dust storms kick up from the dried lake bed, slowly swallowing the remains of a forgotten paradise. An even deadlier mining legacy completely erased our next destination, turning Picher, Oklahoma into a cautionary tale. Picher spent a century as a thriving global hub for lead and zinc mining. While workers extracted wealth from the earth, they were unwittingly destroying the ground beneath their own feet. By the late 20th century, the massive underground excavations left the town completely hollowed out, creating an unstable labyrinth where massive sinkholes regularly swallowed entire roads and buildings without warning. Worse, the mining left behind literal mountains of toxic chat dust that blew through neighborhoods, heavily poisoning local children with lead. After a devastating tornado ripped through in 2008, the EPA stepped in with a mandatory federal buyout. By 2013, the municipality of Picher was legally and physically wiped off the map. The same exact fate, triggered by a hidden chemical cocktail, hit the community of Times Beach, Missouri. Back in the early 70s, the unpaved streets of Times Beach had a massive dust problem. To fix it, the city hired a contractor to spray waste oil along the dirt roads. What the contractor didn't tell anyone was that the oil was heavily laced with dioxin, one of the most toxic, cancer-causing industrial byproducts known to science. For 10 years, families lived, breathed, and played on roads saturated with poison. The truth finally came to light in December 1982, right as the Merrimack River burst its banks, flooding the entire town and coating every single home in dioxin-contaminated mud. The EPA ordered an immediate permanent evacuation. The federal government spent millions buying out every property, relocating all 2,000 residents, and entirely dissolving the town. Today, it's a state park. Our next stop exists entirely because of residential restriction laws, creating the unique demographics of Miracle Village, Florida. Tucked deep into the endless isolated sugarcane fields of Palm Beach County, this small community has a highly specific entry requirement. You must be a registered sex offender. Florida law strictly prohibits offenders from living within 1,000 feet of schools, parks, or daycares, effectively banning them from almost all traditional urban housing. Good. A Christian pastor established Miracle Village to provide a stable housing alternative to prevent homelessness and cut down on recidivism. While critics worry about the safety risks of concentrating individuals with similar criminal backgrounds in one isolated pocket, supporters argue that providing structure, housing, and accountability is the only way to keep track of a population that has nowhere else to legally go. We wrap up our journey with the towns that have leaned directly into their reputations, transforming real tragedies, hoaxes, and literature into multi-million-dollar tourism brands. We start on Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. In late 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed a horrific crime, murdering 6 members of his family inside their home. A year later, George and Kathy Lutz bought the property, only to flee 28 days later, claiming they were terrorized by violent paranormal forces. Their terrifying account spawned a best-selling book and a massive movie franchise that's still pumping out sequels today. Bet you can't guess which one. The haunting was completely made up, though. Years of subsequent court cases and investigations proved that the Lutzes and DeFeo's defense attorney fabricated the paranormal events over bottles of wine to generate a lucrative media sensation. The ghosts were fake. The murders were real. For decades, the town of Amityville has fought an exhausting battle to reclaim its identity from a Hollywood hoax, even forcing the house to change its physical address to deter dark tourists. The public loves a ghost story, and the crowds keep coming to stare at a house built on a lie. If Amityville fights the tourists, the corporate owners of Port Gamble, Washington, roll out the red carpet for them. Built in 1853 by a marine-based lumber company, Port Gamble was designed down to the last brick to look exactly like a classic New England village transplanted to the Pacific Northwest. The sawmill closed down in 1995, but the corporate entity still owns every single building in the entire town. Because the entire community is maintained under strict corporate historic preservation, the town completely stopped updating itself in the 19th century. Over the years, this frozen-in-time community developed a massive national reputation as one of the most haunted locations in the country. The corporate owners fully embraced the supernatural, turning ghost tours and paranormal investigations into the town's primary economic engine. The exact same pivot from history to fiction happened just down the Hudson River in Sleepy Hollow, New York. For generations, this historic village was known as North Tarrytown. In 1996, the residents voted on an official municipal name change, choosing to rename their actual town after a fictional location from an 1820 short story. Washington Irving wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by blending local Dutch folklore with the real geography of the area. The Headless Horseman and the old church were literary tools, but the town eventually realized that Irving's fiction was far more valuable than their own reality. Today, the town fully embodies its spooky identity, proving that sometimes, if a story is powerful enough, it can literally override a map. A similar literary spark completely transformed the identity of Estes Park, Colorado. Estes Park is a stunning mountain community sitting right at the edge of Rocky Mountain National Park. It's also the exact place where author Stephen King spent a snowy night in an almost completely empty hotel in 1974, an experience so deeply unsettling it inspired him to write The Shining. The property was the Stanley Hotel, a grand historic resort that King found terrifying in its off-season isolation. Today, the Stanley has leaned into that terrifying night completely. They run nightly ghost tours, hold massive horror film festivals, and even installed a replica of the movie's famous hedge maze. Room 217, the exact room where King stayed, is booked solid for months in advance. The hotel successfully packaged one writer's nightmare into a legendary tourism empire. For our number one spot, the fire isn't a metaphor, and the nightmare is still burning directly beneath the empty streets of Centralia, Pennsylvania. In May 1962, a routine fire at a local landfill on the edge of town accidentally ignited an exposed vein of anthracite coal. The fire spread rapidly into the vast interconnected network of abandoned mining tunnels running directly beneath the streets and homes of Centralia. For nearly 20 years, residents tried to go about life as usual, ignoring the smoke rising from the asphalt. The environment eventually turned lethal. Sinkholes began venting toxic carbon monoxide directly into family basements. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy was nearly pulled into a massive boiling sinkhole that opened instantly in his backyard. By 1992, the state of Pennsylvania condemned the entire town, using eminent domain to relocate all 2,000 residents and flatten the buildings. The zip code was permanently revoked. Today, Centralia is a barren grid of empty streets where steam rises through cracks in the abandoned highway. Deep underground, the fire is still raging at depths of 300 feet, fueled by coal seams massive enough to keep the town burning for another 250 years. 25 American towns where the boundary between reality, history, and nightmare gets incredibly blurry. These places show us that the geography we take for granted is often shaped by hidden human dramas, corporate decisions, and secrets buried just beneath the pavement. The next time you take a road trip and pass a sign for a quiet, charming town, just take a look around. You never really know what's going on underneath the surface. If you love exploring the hidden corners of the world, hit that button, drop a comment about the weirdest town you've ever visited, and subscribe with notifications turned on. As always, I'm Mike Estrin. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.